Welcome back to 52 Lockup. It is my second season. I'm going to start off with my favorite, the Hippocratic Oath. I swear by Apollo the physician and Asclepius and Ichthya, I apologize if I butchered that, and Panakia, and all the gods and goddesses as my witness that according to my ability and judgment, I will keep this oath and this contract. I will use those dietary regimens which will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment. And I will do no harm or injustice to them. However, should I transgress this oath and violate it, may the opposite be my fate. Now, the Hippocratic Oath is taken up by doctors, but generally it is something that is followed by all healthcare practitioners, right? Unfortunately, there are some that decide to go the other way. Charles Edmund Cullen. He was born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. He was born to his father, Edmund, and his mother, Florence. Now, his father, unfortunately, would die when he was 7 months old, and this death impacted the family of 8 children. So Florence is now a single mother. So now, by the age of 9, Charles actually attempted committing suicide. He's 9. He swallowed chemicals from a chemistry set, and that was his attempt. Now, later on, when he was 17 years old, unfortunately, Florence would die in a car accident. This would become like a defining moment for Charles, right? He would describe this as the most devastating moment of his time. Now, when his mother had passed, she was actually at Montclair, New Jersey hospital. His mother's body would be immediately cremated instead of just being returned to the family. Now, because his mother had died, he's losing it, so he decides he's dropping out of high school, and now he's going to join the Navy instead. He was doing okay-ish, but by the time it was 1984, he ends up getting a medical discharge because he attempts suicide again. After being psychologically evaluated, they released him. Now, upon returning from his discharge in 1985, Charles enrolled at Mountainside Hospital Nursing School in Montclair, New Jersey. He naturally had a gift for nursing. He was skilled. He would have been the next, Florence Nightingale. However, when he graduates in 1986, he's even president of the class. He meets his future wife, Adrienne Bum. They met in Roy Rogers. I'm aging myself. In 1987, they have their 2 daughters. Their firstborn, Shauna, was in 1988. And he begins work at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. Unfortunately, the burn unit at this hospital is where he would explore his anti-Florence Nightingale gifts. He begins to administer a lethal dose intravenously into the vein of the patients. Now, one of his patients that he admitted to later on would be an AIDS patient. Now, he gave them an overdose of insulin. Now, just so you understand, the body naturally produces insulin in the pancreas to maintain blood glucose levels. And I quote this, in HIV untreated patients, there is a severe insulin resistance with increased LPS and cytokines that involves the liver, hypothalamus, the muscles, vessels, and adipose tissues. After a CART treatment, the insulin resistance is mild to moderate with reduced LPS and cytokines that probably spares adipose tissues, right? This is from an article about insulin resistance in HIV patients. Now, this means that the patient with AIDS may have begin to struggle with their levels of their sugar in their body, right, in the insulin in their body. By Charles overstimulating the body with insulin, the cells in the body begin to absorb too much sugar, right, until there is no more. Now, the person becomes hypoglycemic. Glucose is needed for your body. Your body, needs it. But I digress. Now, by January of 1992, Charles, his behavior apparently doesn't get noticed. Patients are coding, which is a medical term used when patients are going into cardiac arrest, right? So St. Barnabas Hospital begins to investigate, something doesn't seem right. They end up finding out that their IV bags were spiked with insulin. Now, Charles would resign from the burn unit, and he goes home and he tells his wife, I've been targeted, it's because I spoke out against something, and that's why I've been fired. Bull. But anyways, during this time, his wife was still the primary giver, and she becomes suspicious of her husband because one day she's like, hey, babe, I need you to watch the Shauna real quickly. She leaves. She comes back. Her baby is very sleepy from some cough syrup, and the door was left wide open, and he just went out for a walk and left his kid there. Later on, his neighbor's dog would be found dead under their porch, poisoned. Okay, all right. Going a little far. At the burn unit, Charles would be actually kind of developing his choice of like weapon, right? He commonly used insulin. Now, as I stated before, the pancreas secretes insulin, right? Now, that is a hormone that allows glucose to be absorbed by your muscles, and it needs to get the sugar where it needs to go, right? Now, insulin is a necessity for everyone, especially diabetics. Now, what people don't understand is that C-peptides are a connecting peptide, right? It's an amino acid in the body that are produced alongside with insulin. The numbers should match. The number of insulin and C-peptides will generally be equal, right? Like I'm saying, they'll match. C-peptide levels are expected, because they're expected to be equal. If you're looking at a test, right, and someone's diabetic type 1, the C-peptide levels will be below the expected range of 0.2. And what ends up happening is, because they're lower, you can now tell, oh, you're diabetic type 1, right? And that's essentially where it's coming from. If the insulin is super high and the C-peptide is really, really low, that means insulin came from the outside. So now we're taking a person who's receiving additional insulin, right? The person's now becoming hypoglycemic. When I say the brain is dependent on more than just water, your brain needs it. It needs glucose. It needs potassium. It needs sodium. It needs magnesium. It needs these things. Without sugar, patients will begin to experience symptoms like seizures, nausea, altered mental status, sweating, tremors, hunger, frequent urination, and tachycardia. Now, because it's tachycardia, your body's going into a panic, right? It's like, oh, we need sugar, we need sugar. Now we have ketones. Your liver begins to release ketones. Ketones are your backup fuel for the body. Sounds like a great backup plan, right? Here's the problem. Your body's pH levels are supposed to be between 7.35 to 7.45. Any changes, your body's not happy about this. Ketones are great for a backup, but they will poison your body. One of the symptoms, like you would even notice, that the breath changes, bad breath, right? So ketones are primarily used by the muscles in the body, including the heart, right? Now, ketones are building up. It makes the blood become acidic. Now, and as this is happening, the body begins to dehydrate. Now, the body's looking for fluid and its electrolytes, but because it's dehydrating, it pulls all the fluid and what it needs inside of the cell. So it's intracellular, right? So it's inside the cell. It pulls it from the intravascular, where the fluid needs to be. Because it's pulling and it's like, something's missing, you begin to swell, which causes brain swelling, which leads to coma and then death. Now, later on, of course, an investigation would be later determined that Charles was the one contaminating the IV bags with excessive insulin later on, but the hospital didn't do anything. They just let him resign. They're like, all right, you go. You cannot stay here. That's it. And he just continues his nursing career 2 weeks later. So now he's at St. Luke's Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. He's now working in the cardiac and intensive care unit. He's there in 92. At this point, tension is building up in his household. His wife is like, we're done. I don't know what's happening between the kids sleeping. Dogs are dying. Something is wrong. I'm out. So she divorces him and she takes the kids, obviously. So now he becomes infatuated with one of his coworkers. Things are kind of looking okay. But then he goes from okay to suddenly becoming obsessive. He's following her around the hospital like a dog. He's leaving her gifts everywhere. He's following her home. He would drive around her house in the middle of the night, which eventually led to him breaking in while she was sleeping and her kids were sleeping in the other room. Of course, he's arrested for the harassment. But then he tries to commit suicide again. They're like, something's wrong with this man. He ends up in Greystone Psychiatric Hospital. Now he's medicated, and he actually would describe this as the happiest times in his life. Interesting. So St. Luke's Warren Hospital is like, yo, we're short-staffed. We don't have enough nurses, right? We see this all the time in the medical industry, right? You see it in the news. And they're like, is he cleared to come back to work? Can he come back? And of course, he's cleared and he's returned because he's on medication. His last known victim at that particular hospital would be Helen Dean, right? So now it's August 1993. 91-year-old breast cancer patient. She's in there, and Charles just kind of comes in, administers something. Her son is there. He watches him, sees him administer something. He didn't question him. The woman who was supposed to be discharged dies of heart failure. Just overnight, just randomly. Oh no, we don't know what happened. The suspicion is that she was actually, what he injected was actually digoxin. Digoxin is a cardiac glycoside, which is an inotropic medication, which in turn actually squeezes the heart harder, right? This medication is frequently used for like heart failure, cardiogenic shock, as well as other heart conditions. It is only administered when like the heart is having trouble pumping and emptying, right? The blood, right? So just quick science lesson. When the heart is pumping, it's pumping due to repolarization and depolarization in the atrial chambers and the ventricular chambers. Depolarization causes the heart to contract, while the repolarization of the heart causes the heart to relax. So when your heart starts, it starts from the SA node, right? The jolt starts there, and then the signal travels to your AV node, which fires after the blood has left the atria and moves into the ventricular. This is where digoxin comes into play. So it increases the intracellular sodium-potassium exchange, but it decreases the potassium, right? And because of this decrease is what leads to toxicity of this particular drug. When you have too much digoxin in your system, it has hypokalemia, which is low potassium in the blood. Hypomagnesemia, low magnesium in the blood. Hypercalcemia is low calcium in the blood. And in the elderly, and renal and liver function will decrease. Unfortunately, the medical examiner sees everything, doesn't check for digoxin. So now we have a little couple of investigations going on, right? But what would happen is he would just leave, boop, and he was out. Like, he was like, oh no, I'm just going to leave and go over here. So by September 1993, he just resigned again. But each time he resigns, he gets a neutral letter of recommendation. So every time he would leave and he was not present, patients would stop coding. No more patients having cardiac arrest. Super important, right? So now he leaves New Jersey. He's like, kitchen's getting kind of hot in here. I'm going to go down to Pennsylvania. He ends up working at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center. A resident named Francis J. Henry's health just suddenly deteriorates completely. Blood sugars were too low. Sounds like insulin. So May 8th, 1998, the patient dies. Now they check, everyone's looking. They're like, what's going on? His supervisor realizes, whoa, he was given insulin underneath this man's care? No. He's got to go. Do you know she was fired? His supervisor was actually fired for reporting him, and he was kept until he decided to resign like early 1999. The woman was trying to help. Anyways, by March 1999, he's like, oh, look, another burn unit. He goes into Allentown's Lehigh Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest, right? And after killing one patient after another, he decided, oh, you know what? I should probably dip out. People are paying attention. So he leaves. Then he begins working at a cardiac care unit at St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's the second St. Luke's. There's multiple hospitals, right? He maintains his job there for like 3 years. And there, I guess he's trying to keep a low profile, right? Because that's what most are like, oh, it's getting hot in here. I got to tone it down. 5 people he killed there, right? By January 11th, 2000, he would attempt suicide again. He lights his charcoal grill, gets in the bathtub. He's trying to kill himself by carbon monoxide poisoning, right? His neighbors smell the smoke. They're like, oh no, we should save him. Charles would be taken again to another psychiatric facility again. He would be returned the following day after being evaluated. It seems like no one was just paying the right amount of proper attention, right? So now St. Luke's is not paying attention to what's happening. I guess maybe because he wasn't doing such high numbers. But what ends up happening is that the medication vials that he had took were in a disposal bin that they were not supposed to be a part of. They were not administered. They were not documented. These were not common drugs that would be recreational drugs like insulin. So they considered the theft to be unusual, and they were like, Charles, you know you're not supposed to be taking medication. No stealing medication. So he gets offered to resign and then given, oh, what's that? Another neutral letter of recommendation. Or he would be fired. Yeah, let's keep it going. He's even escorted out of the building in June 2002, right? Several of his co-workers from St. Luke's were like, something doesn't smell right. Like, I don't know, something seems wrong about Charles. They tried to do an investigation, but then conveniently enough, the charges were dropped 9 months later due to lack of evidence, right? He does an entire nursing career for 15 years. He worked at 9 hospitals, 9 with nursing homes. He eventually is like, you know what, I'm going to return home. Let's go back to New Jersey. He goes to the New Jersey Somerset Medical Center in September 2002. Here is where he would become very good friends with his friend, Amy Lauren. Amy was a nurse, right? She's new. She hasn't gotten her medical coverage just yet. She also has a heart condition. That's only important because of what I'm about to say. Because Charles discovers his friend is crouched down in pain, she's clutching her chest, she's in pain. She needs drugs that she can't afford. So what he does, he breaks into Pixis, the center for all the drugs, and he gives her the drugs. She states that she didn't really question where he was getting it because he was actually helping her. And she's like, he's my friend. I can still live with my kids. I can still do all these things. They become incredibly close. I mean, this man's in our house. He's hanging out with her kids, the whole 9 yards. Everything's looking great, but patients are coding. Reverend Florian Gall was admitted for arrhythmia, right, in the spring of 2003. The patient recovered. He was doing great. He was about to be discharged. Bam! Died of a heart attack without warning. Just gone. An autopsy showed, whoa, this patient had digoxin in his system. That's weird. Investigation showed that Charles was the one that was assigned, and he was also the person who took out the digoxin, because there's documentation for everything, right? Now he's like, you got to resign, okay? We're going to give you another letter of employment. There are 2 detectives, Tim Braun and Dan Baldwin. They began their investigation on Charles, right? And a lot of the hospitals they were working with, they just weren't cooperating. They're like, what? We don't know nothing. They were just not working. They were just not willing to help these detectives out. Even with the Somerset Hospital, they were not supposed to be interviewing the nurses without the supervision of the hospital head, the administrator, the head honcho. They had to be physically present. They were not to be left alone. Accidentally, they were left with Amy Lauren, and she was able to read the charts and tell them any discrepancies she had noticed. Like, oh, that's weird. Why is his C-peptide levels are too hot? She had everything, right? So now she quietly, because she's not supposed to, works with law enforcement. And at first she's kind of resistant, but then she begins to trust her gut instinct, because now she's noticing when her buddies at work, patients are dying. She begins to investigate and starts finding that there are spiked IV bags at the hospital still. She's now putting everything together, and she's like, oh shit, I'm friends with the killer. They actually do her story very well on Netflix called The Good Nurse. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Eventually she would actually wear a wire. She's questioning him like, oh, I'm hearing some suspicions. Is it true, bestie? Like, because that's not the vibes we're going for. She wants him to spill it. He decides, I don't want to say anything. She finds out that he's actually going to work at another place, and now they're panicking. They're like, oh crap, he's going to kill more patients. We got to get this guy. They arrest him in the interrogation room. She ends up getting more from him. And the thing about it, I saw the interrogation room where she's sitting there talking. He's talking to her like they're having a cup of coffee. Like, yeah, so with that patient I use like insulin, like he's just, this is all normal for him. Because of her is the reason why he would be sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms. No hope of parole, thank God, right? My problem is that he only admitted to 40 killings, but it was only confirmed that 29 were his. They suspect he did as many as between 300 to 400 patients. Now, the question is like, how would he do that? Because he was spiking the bags, right? He became an inspiration to New Jersey law, which eventually became Cullen's law, right? This would require healthcare professionals to sound an alarm, right? Whoop, whoop, sound the police. Let me stop. To state about confers to the licensing board, like, hey, we got someone who may not be like vibing with us. The Patient Safety Act of 2004, it forces the hospital to become accountable for what they did not do in regards to Charles. That's essentially what it does. It baffles me how he could kill so many people and no one said anything. And the sad part is when someone did try to say something, it was either hushed or they were fired. And let's say if Amy was caught working with the police, she probably would have been fired. So you fire someone who's literally signed up to save people, to help people as best as they can, but you're gonna keep what? That doesn't make any sense. The math just ain't mathin'. It's really not. It bothers me that these hospitals they didn't say anything. They just didn't stop him. They're like, here's a vague letter of recommendation. Here. That's what we got. Just don't bother us. Eventually, in the end, they actually did have to pay out the families. But I also think that's part of the reason why they just kind of wanted to keep everything quiet. They didn't want people to realize, was my loved one killed when he was there? hold on a second, does the hospital owe me money? If it was not for Amy, honestly, I think he would have just carried on. He would have just completely carried on, and nobody would have noticed at all. And that's a sad factor. That's a very, very sad factor, knowing that people are going to a hospital, right? Everyone thinks of nurses as Florence Nightingale, right? The lady with the lamp. They're running through and they're like, oh my God, someone's here who can try to help me, right? There's a meme that, and I'm gonna see if I can find it, hopefully I can post it here, but there's a meme where there's a person lying on the bed and they show all the healthcare workers holding onto the soul, like trying to pull it down. That is what people think of when they think of a nurse, whether they think of an EMT, a doctor, I don't know, the x-ray, technician. It does not matter. People come to you because they are in the worst predicament, most vulnerable position of their lives, and yet you dismiss something that could be trackable, that's something that is traceable. Your insulin and your C-peptides are made at the exact same time. It would only take but a second to just look at the chart and go, there's some discrepancies. Why is a patient who is not diabetic, with low C-peptide levels, with high levels of insulin? They had to have been given insulin. Who gave them the insulin? Why was so little done? I often wonder about, was his reason for doing all this was because he was angry at the hospital? Was it because that one moment in time, instead of returning the body to the family where he wanted to say goodbye to his mother, was that the one thing that ticked him off? And then once he realized he had a gift for science, he was just like, I'm going to pay them back. I am going to do to them what they did to me. Not that it excuses what he did, but nonetheless, you can't help but to question all of these things. And it is heart-wrenching. It is just like, people trusted you and you let them walk. 15 years is a long time to be permitted to kill people and work at multiple locations in 2 different states and not be noticed. When detectives were trying to investigate, why didn't you cooperate with them? Instead, they were more concerned with how it would make them look. I think it makes you look more heroic. It makes you look better if you're like, whoa, something's wrong. This guy's got to go, because we are about healthcare. We caught this guy. But that is how we're going to start off 2023's 52 Lockup episode. Hope you guys enjoyed, and feel free, if you're a healthcare worker, tell me about what you think about this particular case. How has it impacted you as a healthcare worker? Were you working as a healthcare worker when he was finally caught? Did you know him? Did you work in the same hospital as him? Did you see him? I want to know what you think of it as a patient. I want to know what you guys think. Because that case, that's heartbreaking. And now, because of him, to be honest with you, I feel like anytime someone knows of this case, they look at their healthcare workers a little differently. And last year I covered a case where there was a doctor abusing his ability to prescribe drugs, and was sexually abusing his patients by intentionally giving them higher doses of medication so they would become addicted to opioids, so he can basically make them into a drug addict, and then they would have to give him sex in exchange for the drugs that they needed. These are terminally ill patients, terminally ill, like cancer. These patients were like, things aren't so great, and they needed the pain medication. That's insane. That is utterly insane. Anyways, I digress. Welcome back. I'm glad to be back with you guys. Happy 2023. Hope your holidays were great. I have the tree up for, I don't know if you're doing like, still have your tree up. I don't know what you're doing, how you celebrate, or maybe you're doing the Russian Christmas, right? You're like, it's that time. Which is coming up on the 7th, I believe. And for anyone who is celebrating that, Shnobum Goldem. And it's a pleasure to meet you guys.